Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns, the pre-sales edition of the 33 CXOs. Today, we welcome Tim Fessenden. Tim is the president at PropertyBase, a rapidly growing technology company. In this episode, we discover how his ability to translate technology into customer value has enabled him to scale his career to the very top. This is his playbook.
In the pre-sales edition of the 33 CXOs, we discover the crucial role that the pre-sales organization played in what is regarded as the greatest success story in the history of software sales. When John McMahon reunited the team at BladeLogic, he had a clear vision to create a sales and pre-sales organization that was in absolute unison. The symbiotic and almost telepathic sales rhythm is the benchmark for best practice. The outcome is not only execution excellence, but a shift to a value mindset which transcends any shift in technology. The pre-sales team now take executive positions at some of the fastest, most disruptive technology companies in the world. What we discover is that John McMahon's vision has not only changed how we sell, it's changed what we sell. Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns, the pre-sales edition of the 33 CXOs. I'm Simon Kutis and I'm joined by my co-host Patrick Harrison.
Great to be here.
And it's an absolute honor and privilege to be joined today by Tim Fessenden. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us, Tim. Really looking forward to this.
As am I.
So, for the benefit of our viewers and our listeners today, Tim Fessenden, currently president at PropertyBase. It's been a truly remarkable career where you've been loyal to the playbook members, Vance, pretty much your whole career, all the way through to the present day. And whilst we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about your current role and your current endeavors, just want to start right at the beginning and just tell us, where did your passion for technology start?
So great question. So, I actually went to school at a business school, a small, independent, but well-known and well-established business school called Babson College out here in the greater Boston area. And there really wasn't much in the way of technology. A lot of finance people, a lot of marketing folks come out of there, a lot of accounting. All my friends were that. I was the only one coming out of school at that time that saw, hey, remember, this was mid 90s, late 90s, and it was pretty hot back then to, everybody was investing in technology. And yes, I saw that as a means to an end, obviously. It was, ride the wave of growth around tech. I never thought of myself purely really as a technologist. I thought of myself as, hopefully an intelligent business person looking at large macroeconomic shifts and figuring out, who's going to be the winners and who's going to be the losers. And I saw technology as a clear sort of, tailwind in the market. So I said, how do I get there? I never had any training in technology, just sort of identified that was the place I wanted to live and breathe. So
this was the .com boom.
It was just, prior to, most people when they say .com, they follow with the word bust. So it was a couple of years just prior to the .com bust that everybody and their mother was building some sort of B2B or B2C, mostly a lot of B2B at the time. And so, I started interviewing right out of the gate with technology consulting firms and, actual implementation firms. And I recognized also at that time that you could go and, work for the large, big shop consulting firms, and you could try to make your way through the noise, or you could really get in at the ground floor at something really early on. And that's where I met Vance Loisel, who actually was an alum of Babson and came back to look for some talent. And small company. I think at the time they were just maybe a half a dozen people, a small company called Egg Rock Partners. And Vance had just joined there as well. And he just was looking for some bench strength. And so I jumped right in. I didn't have a single ounce of development experience in my life, but I was hired on as a developer at AgRock Partners, knowing full well that was going to be a short-lived endeavor. I just knew that, again, a means to an end.
Yeah.
And you can, and that's really what it was. AgRock was a great experience. And I still work with Vance today, to this day. So, obviously that's worked out pretty well. And so just to fast forward there, worked from AgRock, and we worked our way ultimately via acquisition with a company that had a hosting division. And then that ultimately made its way to BladeLogic. We can talk more about that for sure.
So tell us a little bit. Obviously, Breakaway acquired AgRock, and obviously that was the first time that you obviously also met Dave, which I suppose that's the first time that the Trinity, the founding Trinity, were obviously together for the first time.
Absolutely,
right?
Yes. So AgRock was a consulting shop that did development, some client server, some web-based development. And our major competitor was Breakaway Solutions, and they were at the time called a full service provider. There was managed service providers back then, and Breakaway called themselves an FSP, a full service provider. Which is a fancy way of saying we would design and build the app, and then would flip it over the fence to our hosting division, and we'd host the app. So SaaS before SaaS was SaaS, I guess. So we got acquired into Breakaway. It was our number one competitor with AgRock. We were added into sort of the hosting side of the house. We had a small division at AgRock that Vance was leading the charge on, that was starting to build up our own hosting offering. And so it was a natural fit to roll in. And that's really, David Echeria was overseeing that whole side of the house. And that's where you're right, that's where it all came together.
Did you have visibility on the whole BladeLogic idea? How did that kind of materialize?
Yeah, it materialized right then and there, on the hosting side. So we had various groups. We had infrastructure people, we had database folks. I worked in the application management and maintenance space, where we would do ongoing, development work post-launch. But what the main pain point, I remember it clearly. We would get called, the whole group would get called and say, all right, all hands on deck. We got to apply this, patch for some database issue or some virus that was threatening the environment. And all hands on deck. You take these servers, you take these servers. And, we weren't that big nowadays we considered very small, but I think we maybe had a few hundred servers at the end of the day. But the amount of manpower that was being used to try to solve that problem was enormous. And that was really the seed that started, what ultimately became BladeLogic. David Echeria and BJ Manwani got together, started having conversations, obviously, with Vance and another gentleman by the name of Steve Krokinos and a few others, right? And they got together and said, hey, we think there's a big challenge here. You remember this is, early 2000s, very early 2000s. Virtualization was just taking form, right? VMware was really in its early days. It had not really hit the production systems. People were still using it in test environments, but not really in production. But you could see, again, this macro wave happening of, okay, this is not a capital expenditure issue in the long haul. This is an operational expenditure. This is an OpEx problem. You're just shifting the cost. Right? You're not buying hardware, but you're hiring 5 people to manage this massive growth in infrastructure. And you could see it forming in our world. Back then in 2001, 2002, or even early 2000, 2001. So again, looking at the macro trends and saying, okay, this is something that, this has got some legs.
Fantastic. And from speaking before, Tim, I believe there was quite a lot going on in your life at the time. How did things go from a fantastic idea and conversations through to that initial getting off the ground?
Yeah. So, there was certainly conversations that were being had at the investment level, the VC level, but Vijay and Dave were running. They were identifying opportunities. I think they were both entrepreneurs in residence at the time at their respective venture capital firms. So they were looking at a lot of business plans, and they had some partners in there that really helped them identify, really a technology and a company called Network Shell that formed the basis of the beginnings of BladeLogic. I became aware of it pretty early on, that there was something brewing here. Well, I can't recall if it was probably Vance who gave me the tip and said, hey, like, we're doing something here. And if you can find your way out of Breakaway, come join the team. And at the time, Breakaway was going through some challenges of its own. That was when the bust portion of the dot-com era was in full effect, and people were unwilling to pay their bills. And so, Breakaway was going through its series of layoffs almost on a weekly basis. And so I had some very creative conversations with some of the leadership there and said, if you can find my way to a list somewhere, that would be great, because I'd like to make my next move. And sure enough, that exited on a Friday, started up that Monday at, I guess technically we were not incorporated at the time, but we did sublease a couple of rows of office space in a little office in Waltham, Massachusetts. And it started that Monday. And I think, at that time there was the founders, then the two folks from Network Show, and, maybe a couple other people. There was no more than 10 of us at the time, for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. And so I know your early job titles in those days were around pre-sales and product management. I'm sure there were lots of different hats. Did you come into a specific role initially, or was it?
So yeah, I came in initially to BladeLogic day one. I think the initial thought was that I'd come in and I would grow a services practice. Remember, we kind of came to software through the services background, at Rock to Breakaway.
Yeah.
We did not grow up as product people, right? We're product people now, but that's not where we started. And so I think the initial thought was come in and grow a services practice, but there were no customers to service, right? There was no revenue to generate. We had to build a product first. I mean, sure, we had, the network shell product as a beginning thing that we could sell, but that was, it was a tool that Linux admins would use. It was command line mostly. There was a little bit of a UI, but it was not something you'd go and sell a professional services contract around, right? It was a tool that was really there for the technical folks.
Yeah.
And so we had to spend months building it out. So the very first role was really where I guess I helped deliver the first version of the product, whether that you call that sort of product management or helping out on the engineering function. It was all hands on deck, like you said, QA the product, get your hands dirty where you could, even code a little bit, I think, at the time. Again, I don't fancy myself a developer by any stretch, but I was technical enough to at least assist the problem that we had, which was get this thing out in a timely manner. But yeah, that was the early days. We had the great fortune of having a couple of sort of opportunities that were very early on. In fact, I think in the first month or two of our incorporation, we closed our first large customer, a company called Sprint Hosting, which no longer exists, but it was a hosting division within Sprint. And we had the benefit of using them as sort of a, help guide our development efforts. In many ways, they had been living the challenge that we were building software for many years. Yeah, sure, we lived it for a while at Breakaway, but they were living the challenge day in and day out. And so we rode them, and said, these folks are going to get us to the glory land. Just listen to them. And that's key. I think that's one of the things I take away in my business life here is, listen to your customers, but really identify the ones that are really going to help you get there. And then really lean in, go all in on those folks. And maybe you might have hundreds of customers, but at the end of the day, you're probably going to hang your hat on 2 or 3, maybe 5 of those that are really going to get you there and listen to those folks. And they were the first ones for sure. And so, sure. Big lesson learned early on in the life there at BladeLogic.
Yeah, that's actually an element of your playbook. So you've actually highlighted that as one kind of key component where I suppose that's quite early on in your career to kind of learn that and actually continue that all the way through. So.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't probably know it then, right? You get the benefit of hindsight and you put, cleaner words to everything. But back then it was very much like, hey, these people know what they're talking about. And then it moved on. Our next customer was Priceline. And they really said, hey, you got to take this thing that you think is an infrastructure problem. It's really an application problem. And you know what? People pay more for application than they do for infrastructure. Infrastructure is a cost center. Applications drive revenue. So which side of the equation do you want to be on, BladeLogic? And that was another another formative moment. Again, both of these happened within year one of that product's existence. Q4, and then again in like Q1 or Q2. So like we were fortunate to have some folks that really helped us and guide us. And I try to take that on into future endeavors and say, who are those customers that you really got to lean on? As we think about always innovating.
Sure. I suppose your role, you're kind of leading the product QA type function at the moment. Obviously, you said it's all hands on deck, so everyone's really mucking in. But how was it that you're able to carry that task out without really having that technical backbone?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, product management is some of these roles are very much about listening and translating, right? And I always pride myself on having a sort of a broad understanding of all the key functions. And obviously, in the role I'm in now, I need to have my hands dirty in all the functions: sales and marketing, and services and support, and engineering. And to the extent that you can communicate effectively with each of those functions, and you can be that translation engine and bridge that gap, that is in many ways, you call it what you will, but that's like kind of the key function of a product manager, is be able to translate. And so regardless of the role I was playing in the early days, maybe there was a QA role, and then it became ultimately much more of a formal product management title. And then ultimately into sales engineering leadership, always held that translation engine. And some of the folks that you've talked to, I know you're talking through in this series on the sales engineering side, and even folks on the sales side, the folks that were able to do that effectively, have gone on to very, very lucrative and very successful careers in all sorts of roles: general manager roles, CTO roles, sales leadership roles. But translating customer pain into real requirements, listening effectively, and is key to success. Because we don't all have the answers. Like I said, we were services guys coming into a challenge we had with 300 servers. Well, guess what? When you go and talk to Bank of America and they've got 25,000 servers around the globe, well, our 300 servers, our challenge there was a very different challenge than the Bank of America challenge. So guess what? Lean in and listen to those guys, because they're probably going to take you to that next level.
That's amazing. So were you able to run a proof of concept technically? Were you capable of running a proof of concept by yourself?
Myself personally?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody, almost the key thing about what we did at BladeLogic was that it worked. It was real. There was no faking, right? And so, and we were very proud of the fact that we brought very strong technical expertise. When we were going up against Opsware, yeah, they had technical expertise, but they were always viewed as sort of the sales and marketing kind of gurus, right? And really had that shiny element. We were the hard kind of bring your lunch pail, hard worker type and we weren't afraid to kind of get a little dirty, and not dirty in the sense of like practices, but actually roll up your sleeves and really educate yourself on the problem and go to work, right? I think we're a ton of hard workers within BladeLogic. And so, yeah, absolutely. Not only was I able to run them, but once I really kind of came into the sales engineering leadership role, I had to build it and deliver it to 60, 70 sales engineers worldwide in a way that they could effectively run it locally in a repeatable fashion, and make sure they were hitting all the key differentiation points and the message and the talk tracks. So it's one thing to do it yourself. It's another to package it up in a way that's scalable and repeatable to the masses. That was a big challenge of what we had to do at BladeLogic.
Fantastic. And in terms of obviously making that transition from early pre-sales into management, Tim, for our listeners, what were the key qualities that enabled you to move into that leadership role still quite early in your career?
Yeah, it's true. So, technically the sales engineering leadership role materialized more out of necessity from the rank and file sales engineers who were clamoring for some leadership. I was still in a product management role in the business unit, but I found myself supporting that team. You remember at the time we probably had maybe 10 to 15 sales engineers but we were right there about to hit that hockey stick growth. And they were all reporting up into the regional sales leaders who, by all at that time, was still early on. They were still sort of understanding the value of a proof of concept and the value of the sales engineer's role, right? I think I heard you talk to Mark Musselman, and he was one of the great ones who really understood that early on. But some of the others, it took a little bit of time, right? That it was a partnership. And so it was early days, but they were really struggling to have that support system. Not that the sales folks didn't want to support them. It's a very different person. I remember we were hiring Linux administrators and Unix administrators who we thought could sell. And so, the training there was, think about a sales leader, right? That has now got a couple of Unix administrators working for them that is, going on sales calls with them.
Yeah.
It's a very different beast, right? And so I think, they looked and they sort of, sought out a support back at headquarters who could kind of be their advocate. And that's ultimately how that role became reality. Ultimately I switched and I started working for John McMahon, running the sales engineering team worldwide. I think we grew that team to over 60, 70 sales engineers before we got acquired by BMC. And then that number got even higher, I think up to 120 or something like that, sales engineers that were supporting the sales efforts. So I think it was largely about being the eyes. Obviously, owning the roadmap helps. They always want to go to the guy who owns the roadmap and to get their thing in. But being the advocate at headquarters, and again, having that ability to translate quickly what they're saying is painful back in a way that we could turn and burn on some product capabilities, and again, be the advocate.
So you mentioned about the owning the roadmap. So tell us about that process. In fact, tell us about the transition from kind of pre-McMahon, Steve Strachan, and obviously, that whole kind of roadmap and how you transitioned and what the key moments were for realizing that. Yeah.
So that's, yes. So in the early days, we had those few successes, right? We had the sprint hosting, we had the price lines, and they really drove the first year plus of roadmap, just kind of rode those horses. What became clear on the back of that, now we're talking about 2002, 2003, is there was we had Enron and we had a few other regulatory compliance snafus out there in the industry that were pretty costly. Not only people's livelihoods, but some people went to jail for those things. And so Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI compliance started maybe a little few years later, but you had HIPAA, you had a lot of these regulations that didn't understand how technology would play into that. And so while the first wave of innovation and roadmap was driven by, okay, let's help out these operational improvements for sprints and price lines of the world, what we quickly found those folks were getting hit with was the regulatory, or their auditors were coming in, the risk assessment folk were coming into the technology folks and saying, you got to give me like a stamp of approval here, guys, that like everything's good and you've got it all covered and everything's secure. And the technologists were saying, like, I don't have the tools to make this secure. And so they would come to us, again, listening to the customer. And we said, oh, wait, we've got this wave here. Not only do we have this virtualization wave, which is driving a lot of operational expenditure that was unforeseen and not forecasted. That's an operational issue. Now we have a risk issue in the market. Again, tailwind, big macro issue. I can get behind that. And so that was, the next wave of the roadmap, and we pushed hard on that. And that was probably to the day we all kind of, moved into BMC and beyond, was probably the number one issue. It's one thing to trade off a cost, which is really the operational side of it. It's another to operate in sort of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And a lot of these companies were operating with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Like, who's going to be the next Enron because I didn't secure a server correctly? And that's where we came in. That was really a big revenue driver for the business. So I think that was the macro move there. And then really the next big wave was this move towards sort of what we now think of as cloud computing, but really this on-demand provisioning capability. Again, a big macro move that has manifested itself largely in, the AWSs of the world, But back then in 2006, 2007, 2008, it was still just, how do I give the business what they need fast without me getting in the middle of it all? And again, big macro problem that needed to be solved. And that was probably the third wave of the roadmap. But they're all tied back to big sort of chunky problems that we're trying to solve within these large organizations.
So who's identifying those kind of opportunities?
Yeah, again, I think a lot of it is, we had some really vocal and smart salespeople. You've talked to a lot of them who were able to identify these trends because of the conversations that we're having. They had partners in sales engineers who were able to translate that stuff down to at least get it to a point where it was consumable, where I could take it and maybe bring it back to the business on their behalf, or drive a strategy with our marketing team around pet positioning. A good example I said very early on was this Priceline deal we did that really helped us think about moving up stack in the business or in the technology stack, into the application sphere, and providing what we do at the infrastructure level to application. We had a ton of really smart folks, especially in the UK, in fact, who were said, this is our primary sales go to market with this product. Like, yeah, we'll sell some infrastructure, but this is what we're going to hang our hat on. Mm-hmm. And they were incredibly successful doing so. And they were incredibly successful with infusing the priority of that into the business, because of just their, quite frankly, just their doggedness of the business, saying this has got to be your priority. We had some good conversations, some very contentious but healthy conversations around what needs to be the priority in the business. And you knew when you had those conversations with the likes of a Jeremy Doug, or Michael Beckett over in the UK on the sales engineering side, that they were not blowing smoke. They're smart people. They're in the trenches. They have the at-bats, and they know what they're saying. So you got to listen to them.
Was that by design? Was that feedback process a mechanism, or was that necessity? Was it survival? How was it operationalized?
Yeah, we had a couple of folks in the back of the business unit. Myself, Derek Yu, Vijay Menwani, obviously was kind of leading the charge there. He was obviously front and center on a lot of these calls as well. Probably more than anything, we were all kind of figuring it out as we were going along. None of us really had sort of formal training in that regard. And Vijay, was the CTO of the business. He came from the services side of the house as well, right? So we're all trying to figure out how to deliver a roadmap, deliver on a roadmap that was very fluid, right? And there was a lot of customers knocking on the door. I think it was more born out of necessity, right? I don't think we came in and said, we're going to have this very this heavily built out process. I think it was more about a little bit of reading the tea leaves and understanding where the business is coming from. And okay, we gotta do that. The other nice part about it too is we had a really strong competitor, OpsSquared. And we wouldn't have gotten to where we got, and they wouldn't have gotten where they got if the two of us weren't battling out. In the early days, 2002, 2003, there was probably a dozen companies that you would say that we went against, and that could, there was Marimba, there was ConfigureSoft, there was CenterRun, the list goes on and on. Names that you guys probably never heard of that all went by the wayside. We were really a 2-horse race. Yeah. And it always afforded us an opportunity too, when we went head to head with them, to see how they were positioning their product and what strengths that they were putting in front of the customer. We always knew whether they got to the customer first, because you could see it in the proof of concept test plan. You could see if they got there first or we got there first. And that helped obviously figure out what gaps we had compared to what they were positioning. So that helped too. I'm not going to lie. That was it's always nice when you have a competitor that's beaten you over the head a bunch of times. You can't help. You can't help but listen. We did pretty well against them though, for what we had at our disposal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on that, was the playbook then born out of kind of necessity in terms of the competition with OpsSquared, or what kind of really drove that?
Yeah, the playbook really was, we focused a lot on the why of, that was a very important part of my playbook, but just in general, the company's playbook. somewhat born out of necessity because, you see the eyes. Look, at the end of the day, we're selling infrastructure automation software, right? So there's only you can only geek out so much before the eyes roll over. So you really got to get to the why. Yeah. So teaching people the why and actually force us to think, well, what is the why, right? What are we really trying to get across here? Force us to really kind of sit down and map out our playbook. We used tools from John Kaplan, the value framework. I think you've talked to John. We really sat down and we hashed out over a course of many days. But really, I remember in particular 1 week where we hashed out this the value framework workshop where we just put through our paces. Keep iterating on what the why is. Why does it matter? What's better now with your product? What are the positive outcomes? What are the metrics that matter? To this day, if you woke me up out of a cold sweat and said, name the 5 core differentiators for BladeLogic, I would tell you: composite packaging, closed loop compliance, configuration object dictionary, role-based access control. Maybe I think that was 4. But roll right off the tongue. And I'm sure if some of the guys who are listening right now, they probably shuddered a little bit when they heard me say those words.
Who was present?
That was our playbook.
Who was present in those meetings? You said you obviously brought John Kaplan. You had a nickname for what those sessions
I called it White Collar Prison. And it was probably the most formative week of my entire business career, watching that unfold. It was a process that, and I think John Kaplan worked for John McMahon.
That PTC, that's right, yeah.
And that's how that came to be. John had built up his consulting practice. And it was, John McMahon, it was Vance Loisel, Vijay Menwani, it was Vic Vaishnavi, myself. There were a few other folks we pulled in. Damon Miller, I think, was pulled in there. It was, I remember to this day, the location we were in Bedford, Massachusetts, in the corner conference room. And it was just a matter of iterating through, what really matters at the end of the day when you're selling a value-based selling methodology, right? You have to implicate the pain of what they're going through today so that they can understand how it could be better in the future. And it was a wonderful, painful but wonderful experience, exhausting experience. But anytime you think about value-based selling, like that stuff just doesn't grow in trees, right? You have to really put an honest lens and kind of look in the mirror and say, what are we really doing here? And why are people really buying?
That must have been quite an interesting event, right? You've got some very dominant characters, I suppose. What was that like? What was the dynamics like within that room? Who was kind of leading that? Who was, who was really driving it? Was there confrontation? Was it heated, or was it kind of all in agreement?
I never felt working with those folks like some strong personalities in there. David Echeria and Vance and John. Everybody was really like on the same page of trying to get to that ultimate goal. I never felt like I was probably one of the more junior guys in that room, but never felt like I couldn't speak up. Or that the opinion didn't matter, because they knew we were kind of living in the trenches on this thing, right? And so they had to trust the lieutenants. I classified myself at the time as a lieutenant, a key lieutenant there. And it was John Kaplan. It was excellent. In fact, after we got to BMC and I became more of like a general manager at BMC, I had him bring that into the business unit. We actually ran that same process in the business unit. He's just such a dynamic person, right, and personality. And he's really able to sort of test you. Okay, you think you're there. You think you're at the goal line. Let's peel this back one. There's a couple more layers here that you haven't thought through. And he does it in such a way that it's just so engaging. So obviously he was our quarterback. But, and John and Dave and were certainly probably the more vocal ones in the bunch. But everybody had a voice, in that room. That's what made BladeLogic so great.
What were the after effects of that?
So we had a crisp way to communicate about the business. It was a playbook, a physical playbook that was printed out and handed to everybody on the sales side of the house and in the business unit, like I said, eventually. And all we set out to at that point was to train people till they couldn't be trained anymore. Enablement is such a key area that is often overlooked, especially in SaaS now. Oh, get in for 1 month free, and then you can kind of pay by the month and work your way into it. People sort of get a little bit lazy about value-based selling and, you know, why it matters. You know, why are you making that? Why are we talking now, right? Is it because you can get 1 month free, or is it because, you know, you can actually derive value? You have a pain I'm trying to solve. It just puts you in a different position talking to the customer. And so we would go 3 days, 3 straight days in sales training with the entire sales force on value framework training. We'd have them dry run it and simulate it with each other over and over and over again. And John really led the charge there more than anyone. But once you had the playbook, it was about how do you beat this into people's head, right? And Jeremy Duggan was big on that. I remember him being on center stage, and we had our European kickoff, and he said, guys, you might think like this feels robotic. Obviously, there's opportunity to kind of put your stamp on it. But I'll tell you, it works. If you do it, it works. And we've given you the keys, right? You can unlock the box here. Just try, just lean in and make it work for you. And so you didn't have to worry about like, what I'm saying correct? We knew it was correct. We had ultimate 100% confidence that what we were built was solving the problem. So it wasn't about that. It was how do you get the message through to the people you're selling to. If a customer decided they didn't want, we got to the point, if a customer decided they didn't think they needed the product, we either they just weren't a good fit, they'll come around eventually, or we're just not talking to the right person. Like we were so confident that what we had built, what we had for them would solve their pain points, that if someone's giving you the wrong answer, either you haven't done a good job articulating it, sales rep, or you're talking to the wrong person. Because we know it works. We know it solves problems. It was just so ingrained in our way of thinking.
Was the transformative effect of the playbook almost instantaneous? Did it take a while to kick in? Yeah. So, prior to the playbook, we had those quick wins out of the gate. And then we had a little bit of, time period there where, deals weren't coming through quite they were. And then Steve Strahan kind of came in and showed that we need to puff our chest a little bit and recognize that, guys, we're sitting on a huge opportunity here. Didn't quite have like the playbook down, but knew like, guys, we got a real opportunity here. So everybody was still kind of kicking around the how to message it. But once we sat down over that course of a couple of months and really honed that framework for kickoff, I forget what year it was, but I would say, I don't know, maybe that was 04, 05, somewhere in that range. It was lights out. Everybody got on board. And if you didn't, well, John would hold you accountable. John's very good at holding people accountable. So. Yeah.
How did they ensure that the pre-sales organization was involved in that process? I suppose, was that your responsibility to kind of bring? Yeah,
I was involved. I was sort of advocating on that behalf, right? Damon Miller, who, if you haven't already talked to him, I'm sure you will. He ran our Northeast team and was very tight with the group. And he was a Unix admin at a prior life. So, again, they lived it. And so what we did is we used them definitely as a way to make sure that the pain points that we were trying to solve were legitimate, number one. And then two, we spent a lot of time beating into the sales engineers the notion of why is it important? Not what it is or how it works, but why is it important? And if the why was wrong, they'd let us know. But first we had to teach them how to communicate the why. Because we were hiring Unix admins to be sales engineers. We weren't hiring sales engineers or I say Unix, we supported Unix and Linux and Windows, but we were hiring admins to be sales engineers. And in this world, selling infrastructure, automation, and compliance, that's kind of nitty gritty stuff. You're not going to hire a professional sales engineer and teach them how to run a Linux command or some Windows command. It just wasn't going to work. And so, yeah, they were very formative in sort of validating the why. They were in every sales kickoff. In the early days, they weren't. I recall I advocating on their behalf to be in the sales kickoff meetings. I think that was important that they saw how the sales reps were being trained. And then ultimately, that's how we trained them up too. We ran them through their own dry run paces, and they had their own talk tracks and differentiation points that I made sure we would hammer home with them. And that's what we would do. A lot of times we would meet together for a period of time, and then sales engineers would break out in sales kickoffs or quarterly trainings. We did so many of these. And then, we would get into the nitty gritty. Remember, there wasn't AWS back then. So part of the challenge was, how do you mimic a data center on a laptop that is probably like an IBM ThinkPad or something like that? How do you mimic a cross-platform Windows, Linux, Unix data center that we're selling customers for? They might have 500, 600, 700 servers, and we have to walk in, self-contained, no internet access, pop that on, and kind of, there's a lot of lifting there, right? That goes on. So a lot of our sales training wasn't just about how do you get the messaging down, but guys, how do you run it like a little mini data center in your little demo environment? It's a big challenge.
Well, lead with why is obviously another one of your kind of playbook elements that you've referenced it quite a few times. And I suppose, it's a key component that's enabled you to bring people with you. So I suppose, on that notion, obviously, transitioning through the acquisition to BMC, you took on quite a big role. Was that right from the beginning? Was that always part of the plan, or how did that materialize?
So I remember it clearly. So we were getting acquired. And, at the time I was fully immersed in the sales side of the house. I was reporting to John, running the sales engineering team, just out in the field, every week traveling to some region, hiring, maybe firing, certainly enabling, meeting with customers for some of the larger strategic accounts. And so I was just in that world. When we got acquired, BMC was creating an automation division. They had a couple of pieces. They had a runbook automation product. They had a network automation product. They had a desktop automation. They didn't really have server and configuration automation like BladeLogic, but they had some of the other parts of the infrastructure. They really didn't have much in the way of a leadership team there. They were in the midst of hiring someone from outside of BladeLogic, gentleman by the name of Scott Fulton, to be the GM for that business unit. He had prior work at HP and had worked with some of the other BMC folks. Remember, David Echeri, and said, all right, tonight, we really need somebody who understands what we're selling back in the business unit to help this next wave of build out. I remember thinking about, I really am enjoying my time out here in sales engineering land and in sales land. And he said, okay, all right. And then he came back a week later. He said, okay, this time I'm not asking. here's your new title. And, we've all been there, or some of us have been there, where he said, okay, in a nice, very polite way, but said, okay, you had your chance to politely decline, but now you're going to take this role. And he kind of gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I remember that very clearly, walking into the business unit. At the time now, you'd have 15 product managers across what amounted to 4 different products, and a brand new general manager who was not from BMC in the role. And now we've got this juggernaut of a product, and the entire sales force is being flipped on its head because of all of the BladeLogic sales team is now going into these management roles and leading these regions, right? And so you really needed to have somebody who understood who the people were and how to kind of get back to the roots. So I initially started running that product management team, like I said, about 15 people, and eventually effectively became the GM for that business unit after about a year or two. And it was, at the time, I think when I left there, it was probably it was north of a $250 million business unit, pretty healthy at that time. So I'm pretty proud of that time. It was a different beast, right? We go from BladeLogic's got a couple of product managers, maybe at the time of acquisition, 3 or 4, maybe 5. Now we got 15, got 4 products. You really learn for the first time how to manage a portfolio, because BladeLogic, while it was a very large product, was one product, right? Yeah, we sold modules, but it was, at the end of the day, it was one platform. Now you've got to figure out how to spread the wealth, not only within the automation division across 4 or 5 products, but now there's within the distributed business side of the business, BMC, now you have Remedy, BMC Remedy, which was a help desk ticketing system. You have the monitoring system business unit. And then don't forget, there's a whole mainframe division over here on the other side too, right? So it's very much a portfolio exercise. We got to learn how to operate within that context.
Was that something you adjusted to straight away, having been such a key component since the very early days of BladeLogic to suddenly be in a very large software company? Was that a cultural shift you needed to go through? Or?
Definitely. Definitely. BMC, people ask me about BMC. I learned a lot about, how to operate within a larger portfolio. But BMC was a nice company. And by that, I mean, everybody was very, very polite with each other and, didn't want to step on too many toes. And this is my opinion and how my experience.
Yeah.
BladeLogic, we were very much kind of in each other's face in a very constructive, but like partnership-oriented way. But if the sales guy didn't like the way something was going down, they'd let you know just as much as the next person, right? They felt very empowered that way.
Yeah.
And so it was definitely a change, right? In that, Houston-based, headquartered, and, obviously just born out of this much larger, highly distributed revenue stream that they were managing. So it was definitely a little bit of a culture shock. But at the same token, I said, let's just put your head down and recognize that, like, you're going to learn a lot about how to operate a portfolio. And again, coming back to the roots of what I said at the beginning, which was I never viewed myself necessarily as a technologist. I think that the skill set could apply in a lot of different ways. And so I said, hey, this is another skill set, managing a portfolio, understanding how that happens, how to manage a P&L. We didn't have to worry too much about a P&L at BladeLogic. It was just sell, sell, sell. And, good things will happen. And so those were lessons that were definitely worth learning. But yeah, it took a little bit for sure. It certainly helped once the sales leadership sort of really became much more of a sort of a BladeLogic run sales team. That side of the house certainly changed I think for the better.
How did the playbook help you at BMC?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing now, we talked about the why earlier. The why was often in the early days was tell them why patching is important, or provisioning, or compliance, or making changes to discrete objects on a server are so important to your livelihood. The why became much more strategic and big picture at that point, and that's what more I have to deal with now, which is, I still have to explain the why. The why might be, why are we investing this way, right? Why are we not investing in an area that maybe someone thinks we need to go invest in? The why is about painting a picture of a future state that's maybe many miles down the road. You're looking at that mountain way off in the distance and saying, why should people working for me, why should they take that long journey to the top of that mountain? Have I painted an appropriate enough picture? And so the why became, as a leader in that team group, became for me is painting that level of a why, which was different, very different than what I was, rolling up the sleeves at BladeLogic. But it still holds true, right? You implicate people in the process, they might not totally always agree, whether that's how you position BladeLogic or why we're going down this totally different strategic decision with a go-to-market. But at least they understand. At least you've explained your side of why you're going down this approach. And, they can choose to go on the journey with you or not, right? At the end of the day, no one's held hostage. But I feel like that's kind of carried through with my daily kind of leadership style. Make sure people understand the why, and then they can make the decision on whether they want to go with you on that journey. But at least you've done your part there.
Sure.
And I got that out of BMC at the beginning part of BMC because it was such a moving object, right? We had these acquisitions and we're part of a larger team now, and people are like, who should I be listening to, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of noise in the system, right? And so you really got to focus on clearing it up, and I think the why does that.
So obviously, much larger organization, lots of moving parts, lots of different people in lots of different positions. How did you get them all to then fall in line with the direction that you wanted them all to march?
Yeah, I mean, you have some wins there, and you have certainly some losses in that regard. But a couple things I think were going really in our favor there. Number one is you've got this newly formed division, this automation division, and it was the growth engine for BMC, right? BMC was spending a lot of time managing its mainframe customers, which was a big source of revenue, but not exactly a growing business unit from that standpoint. You had Remedy, which was a big behemoth in the ticketing system, right? As ServiceNow came along and sort of put them on their heels, but big revenue stream, again, not a big grower. Monitoring kind of had been there, done that, a lot of players in that space. And so, we were kind of a lot of people were putting energy into the automation business unit. And so it didn't take a lot and there was a lot of people who wanted to join the ranks, right? You'd see people coming from monitoring land or the other parts of the business saying, hey, how do I get on that train? And so it wasn't that you had to really sell people on the need to, put more energy and focus and attention on automation. So that was going in our favor. The other part we're going in our favor, like I said earlier, was the field, the management ranks were very much crafted out of BladeLogic. And so they inherently knew that was probably their meal ticket, right? It's one thing. It's very hard to unseat somebody who's entrenched on a ticketing system to go use Remedy, but it's entirely another thing to sell them a product that they don't even have the customers even have in their portfolio or in their investment portfolio today, right? It's a lot of times it was a trade-off of like manual labor versus automation. So it was greenfield from that perspective. So I think the selling of it was it wasn't a thing where you actually had to do a lot of selling, right, of the vision. The biggest thing we probably had to do there was continue to recognize that like BladeLogic, I think there was a thought at BMC that you bought that and okay, we're done. We don't have to go and we've got the stack, meaning we've got everything from server all the way up through the application tier. And yet there were still other products, other parts of the stack that needed to be served from an automation standpoint that BladeLogic just wasn't going to get done. And for example, we went and bought a company called GridApp that was database automation software. Right. So selling the business, okay, you just made this huge investment in BladeLogic. That's not going to get you everything that you're ultimately going to need in this stack. We actually ended up making an investment in a company called Furnace, which was J2EE, application management. Same thing. They all do the same thing. They all either identify changes or they make changes, right? It's two sides of the same coin, but just at different parts of the stack. So we had to go and educate the business unit that, BladeLogic gets you so far, but it didn't get you all the way. That was probably the bigger part of the effort internally. But as far as selling, everybody was on board. They knew this was the meal ticket.
Sure. So putting people in the right positions also an element of your playbook. Was your role at BMC an example of that working?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned it earlier. So, we recognized even before BMC that we weren't going to be successful unless we had technical depth to our sales motion with the sales engineers. And that's when we said, no, we're going to go find sales engineers who know who we think can communicate effectively. We're going to teach them the why and put them in the right position. We had a product that worked and we definitely proof of concept it, but I can tell you just as equally, and the sales engineers hopefully would, and some of the sales folks will corroborate this. Some of the way we won was not just in the product, but how they recognize the technical depth to our sales engineering team. Wow. And I think of that very much as putting people in the right position to succeed. If we had sort of the sales engineer, the professional sales engineer who couldn't at lunchtime geek out about the latest and greatest innovation at Red Hat, or it had nothing to do with our product, but it spoke to the level of depth and quality of the individuals we were bringing into the team. That we would win off that. I heard it right from the customers' mouths. Like, yeah, you guys were better, slightly better. Yeah, you did some things better here, but we trusted you more. We trust your team more because you weren't trying to blow smoke. Your product does work. Yeah, the other product works too, but at the end of the day, yeah, we trust you. So to me, that's a little bit of putting people in the right position to succeed, because if we went down the wrong approach there, with not recognizing the value of that technical depth in the sales process, we never would have made it. That's what Opsor was doing. They were bringing a lot of sales and marketing shine to a very technical problem and not putting the right people in the position to succeed. I mean, it's all relative. They did pretty well themselves. Yeah.
I think that's such an interesting part of the BladeLogic story, especially on the pre-sales side. People like Sahir, Azam, and Sung Park who've come from those very technical backgrounds. Did that change at BMC? Were you then looking for more experienced people once the larger company took over?
I think what became you had to tier people at BMC. So there was definitely the larger strategic customers that were being sold at BMC were not just being sold automation software. They're being sold an enterprise bucket deal, or what we call the bucket deal, the all-in, right?
Yeah.
And so you needed to have certain folks who could navigate that level of sale, which is very different than just selling BladeLogic. But when it came down to automation, no, we never veered off that course of recognizing for the data center automation business unit that you needed to have technologists first. It's just some of those folks up their game. They kind of grew out of the day and down. They became more trusted advisors and sales consultants in the role. So here's a good example of that. I remember hiring the day we hired him. He came from IBM, right? Very technical, but you could tell he could communicate effectively, and he had lived some of that pain. And then he gravitated to the value framework and the messaging very quickly. And the sales guys gravitated quickly, and he's had a great career for himself. Song as well, right? Song was a database administrator, if I remember correctly, SQL Server database administrator who really, but always carried himself with a style that was very trustworthy, and customers gravitated to those people for that reason.
And for pre-sales leaders maybe looking to do the same thing, who are facing challenges, maybe scaling their organization right now, obviously apart from the technical side, how did you really drill into those attributes? Was it just purely personality, or were there further things you were testing for?
I mean, we always tested. I mean, we actually tested our candidates with, I remember I built probably a 20-minute exam that was very technically oriented to make sure they had the technical chops. We asked them what they ran at home, what they did for fun at home. And if anybody ever had a rack of servers in their basement that they were playing around, you knew that was always a good fit. You always knew that. On the leadership side, with a lot of the folks on the sales engineering leadership side, they were not leaders prior to BladeLogic or managers. Think about the ranks we were hiring from. So there was definitely a lot of coaching that had to come along with how do you bring certain sales engineers along? How do you enable them? John always had a saying, and you take it to heart. I always took it to heart, which was you know when you know. Like you can fake, you can hide from it, the decision all you want, but if someone's a fit or not. So he's like, yeah, we can keep doing this dance for the next, months if you want, but and I know how this is going to end. So we can do it now or we can do it later, but we all know when we know, right? You look yourself in the mirror and as a leader, as a manager. And so we try to instill that into the team who did not have a lot of management chops to say like, it's not a failure. It's, someone doesn't work out. We're running here at 1,000 miles an hour. Everyone's going to make mistakes. And so that was probably a big part of it. How important enablement of that team, because they were raw admins that were teaching a new skill set to, how important enablement was to that function. Those are all things that we had to drill into the management ranks. Most of them got it though. They were a pretty solid group. Devakar Prabhakar down in the DC area, and Franklin Prey in the Southeast, Song, here, James Hollinger in the West, Mike Beckett in the UK, Damon Miller, Mike Nakamura. These guys were all, they'd been with the product a long time. They knew the product, so it wasn't about that. It was really a little bit more coaching on the leadership side of the house.
What were the common challenges for those that perhaps didn't make it? Was it aligning to the value side? Was it, being perhaps too technical?
100%. What you just said, 100%. You knew if someone could could get over the hump, right, of the value framework and understand that we are solving a pain point here. It's not about cool technology. It's about solving a pain point that is costing these companies millions of dollars in some cases. So you'd see it every day when you were going through these enablement sessions and these training sessions of people who really understood the objection handling and could just speak to it because they innately understood it, not because I gave them a script or one of the leaders gave them a script and said, hey, if they ask this question, answer it this way. No, they had to really understand it, right? And so a lot of education that we did with them was about how to, tweak the messaging a little bit, but ultimately they had to understand it innately. And there were some folks who just, were just a little too technical, right? And they couldn't implicate the pain and really line up with that value framework. So, hey, gave it a shot. It's a good try. Maybe this sales engineering role wasn't exactly the right fit for you. Maybe it's a different role and you move on. But that was almost always the issue in sales engineering world when we were staffing up, was that alignment. Can I get them to walk and chew gum at the same time, so to speak?
Sure.
Yeah. Fantastic. And within your GM role with BMC, Tim, you actually became involved in mergers and acquisitions at that point. How was the transition to that? Yeah,
and I mentioned a couple of those that we acquired. That was probably my first view. I was always on the other end, right? I had been through the Egg Rock to Breakaway, and then I had been obviously with BladeLogic into BMC. So I started from that side of the house. So this was the first time I really got involved in M&A. And really doing the diligence, part of that, really understanding not only how it fits in from a messaging standpoint, but then, how are you going to operationalize, right, the business. So that was a fun, again, a big lesson learned when you think about going into a portfolio company like that. That's something we wouldn't get at BladeLogic, right? Yeah, there was probably some acquisition conversations that were had along the way at BladeLogic, but we weren't in a position to really make that kind of investment. And so that was definitely a lesson learned. I remember with that Furnace acquisition, there was another company we were about to acquire, and this was just as I was coming into one of the leadership roles there. And I joined a little bit at the 11th hour with another gentleman on the R&D side, a gentleman by the name of Brian Trevor, who was a longtime leader on the engineering and product side for BladeLogic. And we joined that team very late in the game, about 11th hour. It was a little bit of, hey, just make sure nothing's wrong here. And we both got in a room there after one meeting and said with the leadership, we can't make this acquisition.
Oh, wow.
We're not happy. But it was the right decision. That company folded up, and turned out the emperor had no clothes. And then about a year later, we bought Furnace, which was a direct competitor to that company. Had a lot better bones to it. So going through the experience of not only what an M&A looks like, but the experience of saying no to somebody who's probably put a lot of energy into making an acquisition and going toe-to-toe with the investment committee on that front. Definitely a lesson learned, in terms of what ducks you need to have in a row, and make sure you got your talking points squared away, because there was a lot of momentum, with those acquisitions.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess having seen that from the other side was made it easier to understand what's happening from the startup's perspective.
Yeah, for sure. You're definitely empathetic. These people, they're coming in, and in many cases smaller than BladeLogic, right? And they didn't have the benefit of their entire sales team taking over, the sales function at BMC. So at least we had that support system in place. So for sure. And, I take that now, where I'm at now, we're, partnering with a private equity firm, Providence Equity Group, to really make some investments in the real estate tech space. And so we're constantly looking at companies through that lens and doing the appropriate amount of diligence. And it's really kind of an everyday, sort of skill set that I continue to utilize that started there.
Cool. And for the startups out there, is it technology first? How crucial is the culture of the business and the sales methodology behind the company, such as made BladeLogic so successful?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people is big sort of product led sort of go to market is big these days. And, part of that's because, back in the day, we're selling these, perpetual licensed software deals. You could just, you were constantly in hunt mode, and that's the sales messaging was so key. And in SaaS world, you're very much building a sort of you're constantly reselling the sale in SaaS world, right? You're proving your value day in and day out, and that, earns you the right to continue to monetize the customer. But I think what happens in that process is people think a lot about just because it's product led go to market doesn't mean that you don't have to espouse the value, right? That value framework is still important. Just because you're giving them an easy way, no risk, onboarding, product does a lot of the lift for you, doesn't mean that you don't have to implicate the pain and talk about what hurts today, right? What are the positive business outcomes you're going to achieve if you use this product? You don't see a lot of that. And I don't see, I get a lot of vendors call me day in and day out, and you see, I think there's a complacency, or maybe it's a laziness factor that SaaS has created in the market around the sales motion. Mm-hmm. You got to constantly implicate the pain, or not going to pay, certainly not going to pay up for it if I pay for it at all, and so we try to keep selling, push that in, every company that I'm in. Do you understand who the buyer is? Do you understand their pain? Do you understand? Have you told them, how would things be better? Right? How are we going to track? What does success mean to you? I saw that firsthand. I saw sales reps refusing to engage a customer until they were met with the appropriate people who could answer those questions. That's what you saw at BladeLogic, was an incredible amount of confidence in what we were doing there, that people were willing. Hey, I'm not even going to sell you this because I need to talk to the right person or the right set of people who understand the challenge, the pain point, which was shocking to me back in the day to see a sales rep apply that type of methodology, but they were just so confident in it. So I do think we got to get back to that a little bit, in the way things are going these days. It's a little complacency that I think, doesn't necessarily help the people on the sales side of the house.
Sure. So 5 years at BMC, 2008, 2013, and then Yota, where you joined Vic. Is that right?
Yeah, Vic. Triple V, we call him Vic Varan Vaishnavi, Triple V.
Yeah.
So Vic and I, we got to know each other very, very closely at BladeLogic. So a good example of enablement, I ran, a lot of the new hire and new employee training back at headquarters. Not, actual product training, differentiation training, the value framework stuff they'd get to learn. And I remember Vic in that session, day one, asking these questions and just really, really, like, I was like, okay, we've got a guy here who really knows his stuff, because he's asking the 201 and the 301 questions, not the 101 questions. And I remember some sales reps later on coming to me years later being like, oh boy, that guy, like, I was just trying to figure out what was up and what was down, and this guy's asking like the doctorate level questions. So they were definitely wowed by him. But Vic and I, we spent a lot of time, again, back at that perch of being the translation engine for the business. Yeah, whether I was in sales engineering or product management, whether Vic was running marketing or what, a lot of times we were the translation engine for the business. So we'd hole up in a room for hours on end at BladeLogic and figure out what our messaging was, what our objection handling was. Are we missing out on an opportunity, a packaging opportunity? And really strategize on the go-to-market together. And so that's where we sort of, formed that bond in the trenches at BladeLogic. And then he moved to another company, and then jumped to Yota, which was in the e-commerce acceleration space, really in sort of the e-commerce optimization. How do you make sites more engaging, faster? Sort of like a next generation Akamai, and for those who know Akamai in the CDN space. Great technology, and some really great people in that group. And, we grew that revenue stream pretty aggressively. The big struggle there was, I think, back to what we just talked about, was identifying a set of salespeople who really could implicate the pain. Because it was always easy to go with the big 800-pound gorilla. No one's going to get fired for signing Akamai up instead of this little upstart. But really catching lightning in a bottle and finding like a way to articulate that pain and getting the sales team to really understand it. That was a product that you could very easily ramp somebody up on product-wise, like get them up and running on it. And if they, wanted to hit eject on it, they could very easily hit eject on it. And so implicating the pain was incredibly important. I feel like we did that for a couple of years there. Didn't quite have the outcome that the board was looking for, and so they decided to change the management team around. I stayed on for a couple of years after that, and then made my way here to Property Base. So I love it. I still have very fond memories of working with Vic and the team there. Another BladeLogic folks, a couple BladeLogic folks, Jason Garbus, who worked for Vic in the marketing group, was part of that team. But ultimately, had to move on and reconnect with the old band there. That is Vance Loisel, go back to my roots. So we're having fun over here at Property Base.
Fantastic. And so 2 years now at Property Base. Tell us about how things have gone so far and what does the future hold?
Yeah, if you think about it, so you've got this horizontal play in data center automation, and it served a bunch of different markets, a bunch of different verticals. Then you kind of come out, kind of recognize, a lot of things are being verticalized, right? And so you start moving your way out into e-commerce space, which is, again, a few different verticals, but a little bit less horizontal than the data center automation play. And now I really moved the needle to a full vertical play with real estate tech, right? I can't get much more verticalized than that. So, it's interesting. There are a couple of different industries that are just typically laggards with technology adoption, and insurance tends to be big on that. They were probably the last vertical we really made any headway with BladeLogic, and that was probably largely born out of the regulatory compliance requirements. Sort of begrudgingly had to go there, but a lot of them, I think, struggled to adopt technology. But real estate, for sure. But we're starting to see pretty much a bit of a transformation, right? You've got a lot of the next generation of folks are coming in, and either they're picking up the brokerage that their parents ran, or they're starting a new brokerage, and they've coming to it where they were, they grew up in the digital age, and so they're expecting product and technology to move the needle for them, which is great. So there's a ton of investment going into real estate tech right now off the back of that notion. And you're seeing a ton of investment, and obviously we're trying to do the same with our partners at Providence.
So you joined as VP of Operations, but since October 2019, you're now president of Property Base. So what is your role as president?
Yeah, so I oversee a lot of the day-to-day operations of the business. Vance, obviously, is the CEO. He's still very heavily involved, but very much still on the strategic side too, right? He's oftentimes vetting potential investments we're going to make, working with our partners at Providence to identify the next tranche of investment or assets that we think we need to round out the portfolio. And I'm working with all the major functions. When I first came on board, I spent the majority of my time focused on the software we would sell to the brokerages. We have software that sell both to brokerages, but also to individual agents and teams now. We've since acquired some technology in that space. And so I've had to expand sort of my, focus to cover not just a portion of the portfolio, but the full portfolio. Always had an eye on the P&L from, the VP of operations role, but, kind of have even more control over that in the role as president. So, but yeah, a lot of it's day to day, driving strategy, meeting with the team. At the end of the day, we're all about rolling up the sleeves. There's not a lot of layers of management. We're a 150 person organization, and so we're all willing to get our hands dirty, to get us to the goal.
Fantastic. And What are the factors that have allowed you to scale your career so consistently and so well, Tim? Is it the variety of roles you've had, or?
Yeah, I've had a lot of different roles and a lot of different functions. I remember at BladeLogic, it got to the point, just to go back there, I remember where I probably got to this, I finally kind of got to that point of confidence where I'd go to a meeting and would ask the sales rep, okay, what role do you need me to play today? Do you need me to be the CTO? Do you need me to be the VP of Professional Services? Do you want me to be the sales guy, strategy guy? Like, what do you need today? Because I had seen a lot of it in my time there at BladeLogic and since. But I think the success, I mentioned it earlier, but I'll go back to it, is the element of understanding, being that translation tool for the business. A lot of people get sort of that myopic view of just the part that impacts them. But we all know that it's a continuum. We all know that you push in one area, it's going to pop in the other. If I don't solve the sales go-to-market and position the right product for the right pain, then it's going to pop out with an unhappy customer and churn on the backside. If I don't make the appropriate technical R&D investments, then that's going to result in an EBITDA issue down the line in the business. So identifying the fact that they're all interconnected, and the fact that that a discussion around pain ultimately needs to translate to something actionable on the back end, and vice versa. Something that's innovative on the back end, for one reason, you need to make sure that message gets out on the front end. That translation engine is probably the number one thing I hang my hat on. And all the folks that you've talked to that have gone on to GM roles, CTO roles, I've had this conversation with them. I've said exactly that to them. Don't worry about what the title is. Are you a translator for the business? And if you're a translator for the business, you'll find, water will find its level, right? And you'll find that, I want to be a CTO, or I want to be, VP of sales, or a sales engineering leader, or a GM. But you're never going to lose that ability to translate for the business. That's probably the most important thing that I take away. And I think that's contributed to my success.
Yeah, amazing insight there. So, Tim, who is the most, 32 years now you've dedicated working exclusively within this tree. That's a very long time. Who do you think is the most influential person on your career?
Well, 32 would put me at 11 when I got started. So I think you're a little long, but it has been about 20 some odd years. But 25 maybe at this point?
22.
22, sorry, my bad.
22.
Yeah.
That's all right. You're dating me. I know the hair is getting a little gray, but I still got a couple of years in this body. Number one, Vance has been a huge mentor to me. It still is. Still, take a lot of direction there. Mainly because I think he's had that sort of, I say this, very respectfully, because I come from it too, this jack of all trades, sort of master of none approach to it, right? Being able to see a lot of parts of the business has afforded us the ability to be able to bounce in and out. And so I think that's incredibly effective. Nobody in this talk track in this series is going to answer that question without mentioning John McMahon, right? Because of how just influential he is, just so charismatic leader, and just so personable, just so trustworthy, right? You really, really just know, you align yourself with good people, good things are going to come. And that's partly why we stay. That's why, we exit and go and talk to Vic and work with Vic for a few years, and then come back and work with Vance. It's why that group's so tightly bounded, because we knew it was quality individuals, and started with VJ and Dave, but ultimately, if I have to hang my hat in terms of the people that I spent the most time with there, probably, Vance and John really taught me the most on how to lead.
So I suppose if you were to kind of give some general advice to aspiring sales leaders, pre-sales leaders, or kind of technical folk that are kind of finding their way in the world of pre-sales, or some of the other kind of associated avenues within that world. What advice? What's the best advice you could give them?
Yeah, so I would say, especially in the world where there was plenty of products out there where the sales guy has to also be their sales engineer, but certainly in the scenario for you need to make sure that when it is a technical sale, when there is a two-headed horse here, where you're really positioning product that requires a little bit more depth than just a regular sales rep can bring to the table, that you identify very quickly who the folks are there that are truly treating that as a partnership, and those who are thinking that it's a box you check along the way during the sales cycle. That's critical for your success. So even if as an individual contributor, you know those folks who are bringing you into meetings where it's been well qualified, where you're not wasting anyone's time. That recognize the value, the skill set you're bringing to the table, and hang on to those relationships, right? Those salespeople are few and far between. We had a lot of them at BladeLogic, and that was a lot of the key to our success, but you don't see that every day out in the landscape today. So certainly hold on to those relationships, because those are not relationships that are going to, just last for that one product or that one go-to-market. Those are relationships that'll bear fruit for the entirety of your lifetime. I know some of the folks you've mentioned and we've mentioned on the call today. I know I could be selling anything. I could be selling, widgets down the street, and I know I could go work with those folks today, and we'd come up and we'd figure out the value-based selling methodology, and we'd argue about some things, but we know we'd go to bat with each other and we'd value each other's skill sets. So that's the value of working in the trenches and going through this experience, is you have that ultimate trust and faith. But I would definitely say focus on those relationships, and don't think that that relationship just spans the length of your time at that one company, because I'm witness to it here. Those relationships are bearing fruit, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon on this front, for sure. I still talk to a lot of those folks, still work with some of them, and I'll continue to look to those people because of the skill, the depth of their skill, but also the recognition of the teamwork that's required to win. It was what otherwise a very difficult space, right? Everybody's busy, so it's hard to win. It's hard to win in enterprise software. How are you going to win when you're not riding the right horse? You got to make sure you're riding the right horse. So,
some great advice there. Thank you so much. So, final question: what technology or area of innovation do you think will have the biggest impact on business over the next decade?
Yeah, this is a little bit out of left field. I'm in Boston, right? So if I get, I think about this a lot. I'm in Boston, and we have a lot, or I'm outside. I live outside of Boston, but in the Boston area, you see a lot of innovation right now, and it's been that way for a while in sort of the clean energy space, right? And that's an example of a space that's definitely going to require people to make some pretty significant investments and need to be sold on the value, right? You have to really espouse the value there. But I think of that space as, being ripe for opportunity. Just in terms of just a larger, I go back to those, what are those macroeconomic moves? Where are the tailwinds in the business, right? It started with virtualization for me, right? Then it was regulatory compliance. And then it was, everybody's buying online. I should go maybe do some e-commerce optimization, because that seems where, the puck is headed, right? That was a few years back. And I think I always think the lens of, where are the big shifts happening? What are big markets, and are the trends your friends? If the trends are your friends, then that's probably a space you want to get into. And like I said, I'm not a technologist in any one area. I look for business opportunity, and I think clean energy is just at the very beginning of it's going to be a major transformation, and it's not just about how you heat your home. It's going to be everything around around the economy. So probably see a little bit of that with the new regime, the new presidency coming into play as well, right, over here in the U.S. But it's a big opportunity, and the trends are your friends. So ride the wave.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great. Thank you so much for the insight. So I suppose this is the point in the interview where we summarize what we've heard. And I think you kind of just touched on some very, very key points, which I think have really kind of been evident throughout the entire session. And I think it starts right from the beginning, which is the macroscopic lens that's really given you the perspective to really identify those trends. You mentioned the trends are your friends, and identifying the tailwinds. And I think what's interesting is that you've used that mindset to enable you to translate the big why. And actually, the reason why you're able to translate the big why is because you do listen to your customers, and you really understand that you use what they can offer to give you the direction to identify those trends. And you've been able to continue to use that to elevate yourself and grow and continue to be relevant, because you're always talking the language of value. And I think this is what's been so evident about the conversation that we've had today in the session today is you're someone that's been able to make their way from a university graduate with limited technical proficiency by your own admission to a president of a very, very high potential technology company. And that's a real testament to those virtues. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for the trip down memory lane. It's not every day that you get to do it, and it offers some perspective that hopefully, I bubble up the things that sometimes get lost in the day-to-day shuffle. You guys have helped to do some of that. So I love listening to the series, and I'll continue to do so. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us, Tim. I think so much great experience and so much valuable advice as well. Thanks again.
All right.
So that's all for today's show. Thank you so much for our listeners and our viewers for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed the session. I'm sure you've taken lots from Tim's interview today. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please remember to subscribe. Please do like, comment, and share. There's lots and lots of content available on our website. So do please check out somuchsoap.com/blog. And we look forward to welcoming you to another show very soon. Thank you.